The scientists ran the test three times, and every single time, the result came back the same: no match. The DNA of the mummy lying inside that ancient royal tomb, wrapped in linen, buried with gold, surrounded by every symbol of supreme power, did not belong to any known royal bloodline. It did not match any name carved into the walls. It did not match any lineage recorded in 3,000 years of historical texts. Someone had been buried as a king. But science said that person was not who history claimed. So, who was really in that tomb? The story begins in the desert, the way so many great mysteries do. The year was 1907. A British excavation team was working through the sun-baked cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, near Luxor, in what is now southern Egypt. For months they had been clearing sand, moving stone, documenting fragments. Most days offered nothing but heat and disappointment. Then, on a cold morning in January, one of the workers struck something hollow beneath his feet. A staircase, hidden. Going down. The team descended carefully, torches flickering against walls that had not been touched in over 3,000 years. What they found at the bottom stopped them cold. A sealed doorway, still intact, untouched. The royal cartouche, the oval-shaped seal bearing the name of a king, stamped clearly into the plaster. Inside, the burial chamber was extraordinary. The walls were painted in deep ochre and turquoise, covered with scenes from the Book of the Dead. Canopic jars, carefully carved from alabaster, stood in perfect formation near the sarcophagus. Golden amulets, sacred oils in sealed vessels, a ceremonial fan made from ostrich feathers and gilded wood. This was no ordinary burial. Every detail screamed royalty. Every object had been placed with precision, following the most sacred of ancient Egyptian funeral rites. The archaeologists were stunned. They had found a royal tomb, complete, sealed, and almost entirely undisturbed. And at the center of it all, a mummy, wrapped tightly in layers of fine linen, resting inside a coffin of gilded wood, inscribed with protective spells and royal titles. History, it seemed, had just been handed a new chapter. Based on the tomb's location, its contents, and the hieroglyphic inscriptions on the walls and coffin, historians believed they knew exactly who this mummy was. The name referenced throughout the chamber was that of a pharaoh from the late 18th dynasty, a period of enormous power and cultural achievement in ancient Egypt. Everything fit. The style of the artifacts matched the era. The burial goods aligned with royal traditions of that specific time period. The positioning of the body, the orientation of the coffin, the specific spells chosen, all of it followed the exact ritual pattern expected for a ruler of that dynasty. Scholars spent decades studying the tomb. Papers were written. Museum exhibitions were built around the identity of this mummy. For nearly a century, the question of who lay inside that gilded coffin was considered answered. But science eventually always asks again. In the early 2000s, a team of archaeologists, forensic specialists, and geneticists were granted permission to conduct a thorough scientific analysis of several royal mummies, including the one from this sealed tomb. The project was part of a broader effort to use modern technology to confirm or challenge what historians thought they knew. The process was painstaking. Working inside a climate-controlled laboratory in Cairo, the scientists carefully extracted tiny samples of bone tissue from the mummy. The bones were ground into a fine powder. The powder was dissolved in chemical solutions designed to isolate ancient DNA, genetic material that, in the best cases, survives for thousands of years inside hard bone. The lab was quiet, precise. Every step was documented, every surface sterilized to prevent contamination. The scientists wore masks, gloves, and sealed suits. They worked slowly, knowing that one mistake could compromise everything. The DNA samples were then run through a sequencer, a machine that reads the genetic code embedded in those ancient fragments and produces a profile, a fingerprint of identity written in biology. Everyone expected confirmation, a match with the known royal lineage, a neat line drawn between the name on the tomb wall and the body lying inside. What they got was something else entirely. The sequencer returned its results. The team cross-referenced the DNA profile against every known royal mummy in the Egyptian database, against the established genetic markers of the 18th dynasty, against related bloodlines that had been documented through years of prior testing. Nothing. No match. The room went quiet. Someone rechecked the samples. The test was run again. Then again. Each time, the same result came back from the machine. The DNA of the mummy inside that royal tomb did not match the lineage it was supposed to belong to. It was not related, not closely, not distantly, to any of the other confirmed royal mummies from that period. 3,000 years of silence, and when the mummy finally spoke through science, it said, "I am not who you think I am." The historians were shaken. The geneticists ran additional cross-checks. Other specialists were brought in to review the data. For months, the team debated, re-examined, and challenged their own findings. But the data did not change. Someone had been buried with all the honors of a pharaoh, and yet, genetically, that person had no claim to the royal blood. The first theory that emerged was the most straightforward. The body had been moved. This was not unprecedented in ancient Egypt. Tomb robbing was a constant problem throughout the ancient world, and the priests of later dynasties were known to have relocated royal mummies, sometimes several times, in order to protect them from desecration. In the process, mistakes were made. Bodies ended up in the wrong coffins. Names became detached from the people they belonged to. If the mummy had been transferred from another location at some point in the ancient past, it was possible that a non-royal body had been placed, accidentally or deliberately, inside a royal coffin. The name on the wall would still be correct. The burial goods would still be authentic, but the body would be wrong. This theory was uncomfortable, but it was at least manageable, a clerical error of antiquity, a well-meaning mistake made by priests working under pressure in the dark. But the second theory was harder to dismiss. What if the person buried in that tomb was not a mistake, but a secret? Ancient Egypt had a long and complicated history of rulers who were not fully Egyptian. There were periods of foreign domination: Nubian pharaohs from the south, Hyksos, rulers from the Levant, later the Persians and the Greeks. In some cases, these rulers were absorbed into Egyptian tradition so completely that later generations knew nothing of their true origins. They took Egyptian names, they built Egyptian temples, they buried themselves in Egyptian fashion. If the mummy belonged to a ruler whose foreign bloodline had been carefully erased from the official record, the DNA would match nothing in the Egyptian database, because the DNA was never Egyptian to begin with. A king or queen from another world, buried as a pharaoh, remembered as one, but carrying the genetic signature of a people history refused to acknowledge. The third theory went even further. What if this was not a mistake and not a secret, but a deliberate act of falsification? Ancient Egypt was no stranger to the erasure of history. The pharaoh Hatshepsut, one of the most successful rulers the kingdom ever produced, was systematically removed from the historical record after her death. Her statues were destroyed. Her name was chiseled off temple walls. Her image was replaced. For centuries, historians didn't even know she had existed. If a ruler had been similarly erased, their name struck from the record, their tomb reassigned to another identity, their lineage officially denied, then no DNA test would ever match. Because the match would require a name, and that name had been deliberately destroyed. The mummy would be real. The power would have been real. But the identity, the name, the place in history, all of it, gone. This is the part of the story where the ground shifts beneath your feet. Because if one royal mummy can produce a DNA result that matches nothing in the record, the question becomes, how many others might do the same? Modern genetic testing of ancient remains is still a relatively young science, particularly in the context of Egyptian mummies, where preservation methods, contamination, and the extreme age of the samples create significant technical challenges. We have tested only a fraction of the royal mummies that survive today, and the historical record we are using as a reference point, the texts, the names, the lineages, was itself written by scribes working in service of whoever held power at the time. Ancient rulers did not simply build monuments, they also controlled stories. Every dynasty that came to power had an interest in establishing a clean, legitimate, uninterrupted line of descent. Awkward gaps were smoothed over. Foreign origins were obscured. Rivals were erased. And the men and women who carried out these falsifications were the most skilled writers, priests, and administrators of their age. They were very good at their work. The historical record of ancient Egypt is vast, but it was never neutral. It was always, in every era, a political document. If a ruler needed to disappear, the tools to make that happen existed, and they were used. So, when a DNA test returns no match, we are left with a question that extends far beyond one tomb. We are left wondering what else was erased, what other names were chiseled away in the dark, what other faces were replaced on the walls while the torches burned low and no one was watching. So, who was buried in that sealed royal tomb, wrapped in gold and linen, surrounded by the prayers of a civilization? We don't know. Was it a mummy relocated by well-meaning priests and placed by accident into the wrong coffin? Was it a foreign ruler whose bloodline was never recorded because recording it would have been politically dangerous? Was it someone whose very existence was considered a threat to the legitimacy of those who came after, and who was therefore erased so completely that no name, no inscription, no document survived? Or is the answer something we haven't considered yet? The DNA test gave us certainty about one thing, that the body inside that tomb is not who we thought it was. Everything else remains open. The evidence is real. The absence of a match is real. But the meaning of that absence, the story behind it, is still buried somewhere in 3,000 years of silence. The tomb was sealed once, a long time ago. Science has cracked it open again. But the deeper door, the one that leads to the truth, is still closed. And we don't yet know who holds the key.